Hey everyone, welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Wade and I'm here with Alex this week. Hey Alex,
Hey, Wade.
and we're ready to talk about having a framework for a financial plan, which is going to be a really important topic as we get into the Retirement Income Challenge at Retirement Researcher on March 10th through March 13th. Before getting to all that, just a few announcements for everyone. So the 2025 edition of the Retirement Planning Guidebook is now out there in the wild. It's available if you want a hard copy that's paperback or hardcover. Those are available through Amazon. Ebooks are available from a variety of outlets, and you can see the full list in the show notes, but it'll point you to books2read.com/retirement. And that's the number two. So books2read.com/retirement. In other news, on the day this comes out, I'll be doing the tax planning workshop the following day with the Retirement Researcher Academy, where we're going to dive deep into the whole tax planning conversation and when you might realize long-term capital gains at a potentially 0% rate, or maybe 15% if that's beneficial, and or looking at Roth conversions and when there might be opportunities to get the most power out of your Roth conversions. Alex, the other big announcement is we do have the Retirement Income Challenge coming up. It'll be March 10th through 13th. It's 2 hours a day from 12 to 2 Eastern time each day. So that's 8 hours with Wade and Alex and Jason Rizkala and all the team at Retirement Researcher, where we'll really do a deep dive into making sure you have a good financial plan by the end of the week using our funded ratio software. Now, I mentioned funded ratio, and that's really kind of the end goal of what we'd like to talk about getting into these next couple episodes is really this idea of building a framework around your retirement. And in that regard, as I know we'll have a number of excited fans on YouTube, this will be more of an Alex-centric episode. Alex is going to walk us through why to even think about having a framework as part of the planning process.
And so
Right,
when you're
Alex?
done, you can listen to this at 5 times speed. Or I don't even know the guy's name. But wait, I did pick up. You're one of the most humble guys I know. And did you refer to yourself in the third person?
I did for the purposes of the challenge, I suppose.
Oh, for the purposes of
The Wade Meister is going to
the
lead the
Wade
challenge.
Meister. The Wade Meister. Yeah, no, we're kind of leading these episodes up to the challenge just because there's only so much we can cover in the challenge. I mean, we would make it 4 hours a day if left to our own devices. But we'll give you a little sprinkling of what's to come because we feel we feel very sanguine about the challenge when we run it, and it's one of the most professionally gratifying things we do. Frankly, I enjoy it tremendously. So with that, Wade, I recommend go to the show notes and sign up for Retirement Income Challenge.
Yeah.
It's a nerd party, if you will, of sorts.
Yeah, join us. It's a lot of fun. And we usually end the week with 300 to 400 new financial plans
Yeah.
out in the wild. So it's really gratifying in that regard.
All right, there we go.
But to start heading us in that direction, Alex. So I think maybe what's prompting this episode in particular, a couple episodes ago, I think 2 episodes back, you led us through a look at the year in review for 2024. And as we look back in the past, in 2024, we can see that things end up working out, at least in terms of the financial markets, at the very least. But that's not necessarily clear at the time. There's always different things going on. And so what should we be thinking about just as we read the news each day and we see all these events happening? What do we do about that?
Well, I mean, and before we even get into the financial plan, we need to be in a good mindset, right? And I'll borrow from I know he somewhere in the Bible or something like that. But effectively, I take a page out of George Harrison's "This Too Shall Pass" album. That's really the too long didn't read version. But when the news is coming fast and furious, like we saw 2024, and already first month and a half of this year, you're seeing that as well. It's very easy to fall into the what's going to happen next. The world's going to a hell in a handbasket, or the flip side is happy times are here again forever and ever, and nothing else will harm us. Kind of vibe. And so you really want to take a step back from all of that And from a psychological perspective, there's many ways to begin to interpret news that could be jarring. And one of the things that I've always gravitated towards, that struck a chord with me when I heard it the first time, and was used a lot during my training. And again, just for those of you, by education, I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm more of a researcher. I wasn't necessarily a therapist, but you're exposed to a lot of these modalities, if you will, in the training. And something that always struck a chord that I've always tried to have in my back pocket that's pretty interesting is what's known as the RAIN model. And that speaks to actually a lot of the things that are going on right now. You see it a lot in mindfulness, and you see it a lot in like the idea of being present, right? And the RAIN model is interesting, and it stands for recognize, allow, investigate, non-identification, and non-identification. Wait, did you think I was going to get those in one shot without like stumbling through them, being under pressure?
Yeah, that's great. Although we talked about before the episode, pretty much my only role was going to be to prompt you on each letter, so you covered it.
Right. Oh, okay.
Now we're ready for your Hamlet monologue.
I thought in the version I'd be like, oh, what is A again? No, no. But all right, and so I'll go through these real quick before we get into the plan, because before we can even talk about planning and this and that, it has to you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to again be in the moment. If not, you come across like those Charlie Brown cartoons when the teacher's talking and it's just wah 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 wah, and you're just phased out because you're thinking about something else that's happening in the doom scroll. And so the R is for recognize. And this is where you purposely want to observe and label what's going on inside of you. There's nothing wrong with feeling stressful, but the difference is being owned by that stress. And one of the first steps you can do is just the recognition of it. And this goes back to I'm not angry, I'm not nervous, those kind of responses. Maybe you are. If enough people are telling you that, you know, who knows? Maybe they're onto something, right? And so you want to be able to, as a first step of the RAIN model, recognize that something is off, right? What is it that's throwing off that feeling? The A is the allow. And this is not necessarily trying to actually now repress that stress or just, stamp it down, but just you're recognizing this there and then acknowledging and accepting its presence. You're giving it permission to feel it. And that's fine. And in many ways, when you're going through that relaxation, when you're trying to meditate, you're not trying to fight the feelings, the fleeting thoughts that are coming through your head. You accept them and you let them drift in and out, right? And so that's a little bit of what that allow is. There's a recognize, allow. You don't want to fight or deny it, because that usually will just make things worse. It'll exacerbate it. And so
Okay.
the more you resist, the stronger it may become, and you want to let it breathe. Wait.
Yeah, and then so I is then, so we're recognizing, allowing, I for investigate.
There you go. Encyclopedia Brown. Solves it again. No. Yeah, you're right. Investigate. That's when you're now trying to gain insight into it, right? You've recognized it, allowed it. Now you're investigating. What's going on here? What was the precursor that may have led to this? Things along those lines. And if you catch yourself doing this, trying to gain insight from it, you become more measured about it. You start thinking, okay, what would it take for this to be different? Those kind of things. And again, this is one of these things that if you recognize that this too shall pass theme, that you'll draw from previous experiences, and you'll probably draw the similar conclusion with regards to that. The other one is non-identification, right? And this is where you think about how you feel as a state or a trait. We brought that up many times with the reset, right? And most likely what you're feeling is a state. And so it's okay. You're not defined by that. It's all right. You cannot will your thoughts or feelings as they arise, but you recognize them as they are. You recognize that you're more than your emotions. And that's very powerful, because once you take this step, now you can have these feelings without being a stimulus response person. You don't need to act on them without thinking of it, but you have to go through this process first and you'll see that it'll pay off in spades. And this is all leading into the financial plan, because you want to be able to, and every day there's always going to be news that's going to be jarring. And if you know, if you don't give yourself that chance, they say freedom is the space between stimulus response. Well, what we're trying to do is amplify that freedom right here, right, with regards to the rain model, if you will. And once you can begin to do this, and I'm in, by no means do I think listening to me, 2 minutes later you're fine, right? But there is a way, and if you look into this, you'll find that it can generalize very well to many other things that you're doing, as I'm generalizing this into the financial planning process.
Okay. So in that regard, then you're talking about like centering yourself, being able to take a step outside, making sure that you're remembering that this is just a state of what's going on in the world. Why is that really important then? Is the news cycles really always filtering us with new stories, new concerns, new worries, negative news, and so on and so forth?
No, absolutely right. Right. We're creatures of habit. If we're bombarded 24/7 with a certain type of news cycle, it's hard to really, put yourself out there and think, oh well, never mind, right? And part of that is, if you really think about it, we're not wired for investing. We can't undo 300,000 years of evolution. And the reality is, we were made to continue to live, to breathe air, in perpetuity, as far as we can take it, not necessarily to be successful investors. And what's made us, the apex, whatever, living organisms, if you will, in the world, has been very conducive to keeping us alive, but not for investing. And I would point out there's three things that I think really bring this home. The first one is loss aversion, our use of mental shortcuts, and the fact that we're gregarious beings. We're more social beings. And what do I mean by all of that? Loss aversion, we're 2.5 times, the psychological valence of a loss is roughly 2.5 times greater than that of a gain, right? And so we're wired not to lose. And you can take that to its natural conclusion, which is no pain, even physical, stay alive. And, simply put, when you heard a noise in the savannah, you ran first and then asked questions later. It kept you alive. Even though there was a lot of, type 2 errors, who type 1 error, who cares? It kept you alive, right? The other one is the mental shortcuts. From that standpoint, look, the brain you will not be able to function if you thought out every single action that you take. In investing, there's a 2 and 20, right? Where some hedge funds will charge you 2% and 20% of the profits. The real 2 and 20 is the brain is roughly 2% of your body weight, but eats up roughly 20% of your calories. So think about it. It's always functioning. And if you thought this morning when you got up, did you think, okay, now I'm going to supinate my hands and grab the toothbrush, and now I'm going to pull it towards me. Then with my other hand, I am going to grab the, you won't get past the day. Although I think my younger son does that, because to get him out of the house and not being late for school is a challenge. But the reality is you can't. You do things on automatic mode, right? And so you have these mental shortcuts, which again, if you're in the savannah, you hear a noise, you're not going to all of a sudden say, I am going to thrust my hips to the right and, start putting my right foot down on the balls of my feet. And you don't do that. You just run along, right? And so from an investing standpoint, we suffer from a lot of those mental shortcuts that are sort of counterintuitive to what a successful investor would do, such as the affinity effect, right? This is where if you see someone every day, if you see them every day and all of a sudden you like them, you tend to trust them a little bit more on things that they may not have the competence to provide advice on, right? You can see that on CNBC. After a while, you kind of see, I'm going to take Jim Cramer, not because I think poorly or good about his investment advice for the purposes of this podcast, but just from the standpoint of that could be somebody you see every day. And after a while, he may be picking stocks by just throwing darts, right? But you hear him enough, all of a sudden you think, hey, I like this guy. This guy must know what he's talking about. So that's a shortcut that you take, so you don't have to think through things too much, which again, for surviving is great, but for investing, not so great. Recency effect. That's another shortcut, right? You take what's happening now and you extrapolate that into the future. I'm going to revisit this when we talk about the financial plan itself. Survivorship bias. You just remember all the Bitcoin millionaires, but you forget all the ones that lost money off of it, right? And even though the numbers could be staggering on the ones that lost money versus made money, it doesn't hit you the same way, right? And so those are mental shortcuts that you begin to have, these biases that you begin to have, just because it helps you be more productive in the everyday of life. If not, you'd just be stuck in paralysis, right? And the last one that you have to fight is we're social beings, right? This is where you bring in the herd mentality a little bit. We're social beings. We like being in groups. The example I always give is if you put a monkey and myself in an island and you come back a year, the monkey will probably be alive. I will not. If you put, I don't know, 20 human beings in an island and 20 monkeys, it'll be a different story, right? And so that social fabric that we have lends itself very well to surviving. But sometimes you can be lemmings going off the cliff, right? And so that's where it becomes tricky from an investing standpoint. So we're great at surviving, but poor investors. Now, the trick is, even though I've said all of this, and if you read the Kahneman books and all of that, and every behavioral finance person out there, their conclusion is we have these, but you can't really overcome them. They're just ingrained. Remember, you're fighting 300,000 years. Markets have only been around roughly, let's say 300, and that's being generous, 300 years, right? I'm going back to the Dutch, if you will, Wade, from that perspective. Yeah, exactly, right? I was thinking more of the ships, but
East India Company.
that kind of thing. But the reality is, you're not going to just overcome this just because you've read a book on it or anything like that, right? And so, to me, the trick is having a process and framework in place to work from, to give ourselves the best chance of success. Similar to that Annie Duke book, where good decision doesn't necessarily guarantee a good outcome, but if you make enough good decisions over time, you improve your probabilities, if you will.
Yeah, right? So it's basically a matter that what it takes to survive in the short run, fleeing danger and so forth, is really the opposite of what it takes to be a successful long-term investor, which requires a process to overcome all these behavioral instincts to flee, when the reality is staying the course has always historically been a better strategy. So could you talk more about what exactly that process is that you're referring to?
Yeah, it's simply put, to me, that's the financial planning process. The financial planning process begins to incorporate a systematic way of thinking through things regarding dollar signs for your life. This has nothing to do with becoming a better person, in times of stress or anything like that. This is just strictly driven to anything that intersects money. This is where the financial planning process really serves as that counterbalance to what you're fighting against from the standpoint of your biases, right? It provides the context as to why you're investing, Then in the background, it does a lot more than providing a framework, because the trick is it's actually trying to amplify some of the things that you can incorporate and intervene to maybe minimize to some extent the biases by focusing on other sort of human tendencies that you have.
Is that so? It's focusing on how to use behavioral insights or insights from some of this behavioral research to help manage the biases that we experience.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Yeah, exactly right. It's almost like I'll use a pickleball example, right, Wade? It's the third shot drop. It's neutralizing a ball in the kitchen when there's nothing there. It helps kind of reset and level set. Now, some of the things in the financial planning, so the financial planning process serves as that framework, and we can get into the underlying framework of the planning process. But really, a financial plan, I think we get caught up in a cash flow based plan and ledgers and taking things to the fifth decimal point. Or we get caught up in Monte Carlo. Oh, someone could say, oh, Monte Carlo, oh, but you know what? Those inputs are terrible, and I don't trust anything with Kurdic curves, that these kind of distributions, they get all up in it like that. And to me, that's missing the forest for the trees. At the end of the day, it is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but the true value of planning, why everyone should engage in a planning, are the things that it helps neutralize. And it does that by, the first one out there is backcasting. It helps you backcast your future. And what I mean by that, that's you're working backwards from an end goal. It's the what's the Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, then anywhere will do, something like that, right? In terms of that quote. And the reality is, did I lose you, Wade?
I'll have to look that up.
I think the rabbit or the guy with the clock. And if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will do, something like that. Roughly speaking. And so backcasting helps stop that. And what it really is, it's if you work backwards from an angle, then you always have a reason for what you're doing. You decide what you want to describe as a successful outcome. It's up to you. You decide it. What Wade thinks is a successful outcome is very different than what I want as a successful outcome, etc. But you work backwards from there, and you work how to systematically get there. Because when you work backwards, it's okay, what's the step needed there? What's the step before that? 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 And before you know it, here you are, right? And now you've laid out that path, right? And so you can always refer back to that plan because you've done it from a backcasting standpoint. And that's part of the reason why we want to do this, the retirement income challenge. It's not good enough to just say, I'm just going to use $1 million to say $1 million. I have $1 million now. I'm getting ready to retire in 5 years. And by 20 years, I want a lot more than $1 million. And I'll just live my life with whatever's there. That's effectively what I think is a default financial plan for many, although it may not be $1 million. It's whatever money it is, but that's what it is. That's the same thinking. And you don't want to do that. You really want to give yourself what's the end goal. Now let's backtrack from there. And that will reinforce the discipline needed in times where you're going to be stressed about things. That's the first thing that I know that a financial plan does, that you see that it gives you that sort of plan. Regardless, the fact that you have a plan is an intervention in and of itself. The other piece, and this has been coming around a lot, and that's I've even seen commercials of this now. Your future self. You've seen that, right? What would your future self think? I even used that with my kid the other day. Grades were coming in, and I said, look, and imagine yourself 6 years from now. Are you doing yourself a favor then? Similar conversations to I'm sure your mom had with you, Wade, right? About your grades.
Well, maybe I've had with my kids. Or at least I've had with my children as well.
Yeah. I assume, what were you in high school? Were you like an all-A student? I assume you are. You're very diligent. Were you like pretty much a 4.0?
Yeah, I was more diligent in high school.
Oh, you still are. But yeah. And so and the reality is, when you frame things in your future self, you're combating against temporal discounting. And that's a fancy way of saying it's hard for people to think long term, because the valence of shorter term time horizons just overwhelm longer term horizons. And so by thinking in terms of your future version, you're really doing yourself a great service. And what is a financial plan? Remember, through backcasting is, what do you want to accomplish with this wealth? Where do you want to be 25 years from now? I'm using 25 years as a standard, but you can say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, whatever. Right? And so that helps. That mindset helps tremendously. And if you think about your future self, what would your future self think? Then you're becoming accountable to yourself in a manner that's kind of interesting, and in a manner that actually has results. There's been a lot of work with that, and I off the top of my head, I can't remember the folks that did it, but it's who's a professor at UCLA, Hal Hirschfeld. He's exactly. He started this sort of I think he coined that term, frankly, but it's a great simple construct that helps you really think about it. And so the financial plan, answers that what about your future self? a little hack when you're deciding to do something, at least from a financial planning standpoint, is to ask yourself, how will you feel about this in 10 minutes? How will you feel about this in 10 months? How will you feel about this in 10 years? Right? You see the difference there? Will you treat yourself in 10 minutes? Thank you for this. This is, if you do something rash, the answer is probably yes. If you do something rash and you ask yourself in 10 months, your answer is probably. I know it. I can feel it. If you ask yourself in 10 years, I think at the very least, you give it a significant amount of greater contemplation. And so the plan really helps emphasize your future version a lot better than just not having something. Because not having something, again, you just tilt back to your biases. You're quick, you don't want to think about it. And so you're going to be more intuitive about it. And as much as you think you have great intuition, I would say, yeah, you probably do for surviving, but not necessarily for being a great investor. And I'm using investor to generalize all things financial planning right now. All right. And the other piece is by thinking about your future self, you're externalizing yourself. And that's what, when we talked about the RAIN model, that's effectively what's happening, right? If you're all of a sudden recognizing an emotion, you're allowing it to exist inside of yourself, but you're also giving it that separation, saying, this doesn't define me. Let me now investigate this a little bit more, right? You've effectively personified, the financial plan is beginning to personify what the RAIN model should be for you, in many ways. And so it's a very interesting piece right there. And frankly, the last one is it's a rules-based decision-making process. And go back to the RAIN model, right? It's objective and dispassionate. It's decision-making, but it's pre-made during the times where you were in the harbor, not in the tempest. Right? And that's where you're going to naturally be more rational about things, having that decision-making process. And so to me, the financial plan serves as that financial planning statement, financial policy statement, if you will, where you're presetting what to do. And people do this on investing all the time, right? Oh, I'm going to rebalance. Not this month, right? No, you shouldn't. You should be actually robotic about it, right? If you will. And so to me, Wade, because you're hearing this, and if there was ever a numbers guy, that would be you, correct? We talked about the benefits of a financial plan, and I didn't discuss, hey, is this cash flow versus goals based, or within goals based, are you doing, Monte Carlo, and how many runs are you doing, and all of that stuff. I'm not saying it's not important, but to me, the most important part of a financial plan is you're giving yourself a quiver full of arrows to help you against your biases when the moment of truth arises.
Yeah, it's a form. Commit yourself to following this plan that you've created at a time when there's not as much stress, so that you have the framework to get through that stress.
And again, this is something that we feel very passionate about, and I encourage everyone to sign up for our retirement income challenge, where we're going to get into this with more detail, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of actually doing a plan as well. So all of that will be in the show notes, and I highly encourage you. Now a little teaser for the next episode, I would say, is once you have all of these in place, what kind of framework is it beneficial for you to lay out your financial plan on? Right, Wade? Did I do a good cliffhanger? It didn't sound that. It didn't sound that like ooh.
How are we gonna put some concreteness around this?
Yeah, but that would be your job in the next episode, right, Wade?
Yeah, and to follow up on your Alice in Wonderland. So yes, the Cheshire Cat. So one day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire Cat in a tree. "Which road do I take?" she asked. "Where do you want to go?" was his response. "I don't know," Alice answered. "Then," said the cat, "it doesn't matter."
Did I get it? Well, I did say rabbit, I think, so I got it wrong in that sense. I didn't know it was.
You at least, yeah, you were It was right, more or
I was
less. Yeah, you
rhyming.
wouldn't have got it right on Jeopardy,
I
but
was
yours wasn't.
rhyming. It's good enough for government work, if you ask me.
Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
All right, everyone. Well, that's it for this week's. Oh no, do you want to do a question?
Oh yeah, right. The our new theme here. So listener mail. Yes. Had a very nice message that was covering a number of topics, but one that I thought was really worth mentioning here, and it was in reference to reading the retirement planning guidebook. So she wrote, "It's becoming increasingly obvious that Medicare Advantage is a scam. You should not be presenting it as a rational option, since nearly everyone who has it and gets seriously ill, which is all of us someday, regrets signing up for it as a bad financial deal they're stuck with." Yeah, so that's good feedback. Thank you. I wouldn't go so far as calling it a scam, though nonetheless, I hope I do get the message across in the retirement planning guidebook that at least for risk averse individuals, you really do want to think seriously about original Medicare with a comprehensive supplement. That if you don't get your, also known as Medigap, if you don't get your Medicare supplement or Medigap when you're first eligible, you have to go through underwriting at a future date, and you may not be able to get it at that point. So a lot of people get enticed by Medicare Advantage. That's the program that's running all the commercials all the time. More than half of Americans now use Medicare Advantage. It's kind of sold as lower premiums, some additional benefits, things like maybe dental coverage and so forth, eye care and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think the strategy people might have is let's pay these lower costs on Medicare Advantage while we're still healthy. Someday, if we get sick, then I'll switch to original Medicare with a supplement. The reality is that that's not always feasible or possible. And so, in the long run, if you're building that long term financial plan and you're risk averse and so forth, right, Medicare Advantage can sound really great in the commercials, but you really do want to do your due diligence and research about whether that's the right plan for you. So I hope I get that message across in the book. I wouldn't call it a scam, but at the very least, I do try to encourage people to think twice before signing up for Medicare Advantage.
So, what would your future self say, Wade, if you signed up for Medicare Advantage?
My future self would say, "Oh, why didn't you just go with original Medicare plus a Plan G supplement? You would have been so much better off in the long run."
There you go. There you go. And would you have the same intonations?
Probably. I'd be getting quite frail at that point. So.
All right, Wade. All right, everyone. That's a wrap. We'll see you next week on Retire with Style.